day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday. Tuesday, Casual Tuesday. Wednesday, Casual Hump Day. Thursday, Casual Thurs. That's what we call it. And Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
It is Friday, June 19th. Happy Juneteenth, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, not so casual Friday, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democratic Congresswoman from New York's 14th District, will be joining us to discuss the primary that is taking place in just a couple of days and more. Then we will talk to Professor of History and African American Studies at University of Houston, Gerald Horne, on the meaning of Juneteenth. Meanwhile, 700,000 young people get a reprieve as SCOTUS blocks Trump's DACA repeal. And Tulsa braces for Trump's coronavirus party as blue city mayors begged their red state governors to allow mandatory masks in the midst of a rising infection rate. A top State Department official resigns over Trump's race response. And Amy Klobuchar puts on a clinic in cynicism as she bows out of a race she already lost. Facebook nixes Trump's Nazi iconography advertisements. New York City cops are whispering of blue flu on July 4th. And Chuck Schumer's multi-million-dollar Kentucky project in mediocrity seems to be failing. And it doesn't look very good in Colorado either. Philadelphia pulls $33 million of proposed police funds. That's good, but it only equals 4% of their police annual budget. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Glad you could. It is a casual Friday, but if you are watching, you will notice that maybe for the first time in, I don't even know when, I am not wearing a soft colored shirt, but I am wearing my normal collared, not terribly stiff, but somewhat stiff collared, just because we're having a congresswoman on today. And so I wanted to make sure that I dressed up a little bit. And so there it is. If you're wondering why I'm not as casual as normal. Very excited to have AOC on the program today. And frankly, also very excited to have Professor Horne on. He was last on this program, I believe it was almost a year ago. Maybe it was a little more. Maybe it was in 2018. I can't even remember. But it is Juneteenth, and we're all celebrating. Let's just start. I want to, just in honor of having AOC on the program, let's look at this. She is running. There are, I believe, I don't think there are 4 or 5 other candidates. I'm not 100% sure, but there's like 2 other major ones. And she's had a couple of debates with them over the past couple of months. They've obviously been, socially distant on Zoom debates. Her main competitor is a former CNBC anchor, a former Republican, Michelle Cabruso Carrera, who didn't move into the district until last year. And prior to that, she was living in Trump Tower. So that's what they call counter programming, I think. But let's see. This is the closing campaign ad from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in her race. As you know, you can vote this Tuesday, June 23rd in New York State. You can also, I believe, vote early just about everywhere in the state. You got to check your local website for your location where you can do that. Absentee ballots, I believe, if you have them, send them in immediately. They need to be postmarked, I believe, by the 22nd. You can also deliver them, so mail them today. Here is the closing ad from AOC.
Right now, New York is experiencing 3 concurrent crises. Crisis of health with COVID-19, the economic crisis of mass unemployment, and the crisis of racism in our systems of law enforcement.
The crisis in New York reaching a critical mass.
All 3 of these crises has something crucial in common. They haven't presented us new problems, but they've set on fire existing ones. But what if these broken systems weren't built to last in the first place? What if a better world is possible? These are systemic problems, and I'm proud to have been fighting for systemic solutions, like Medicare for all, a federal jobs guarantee, and the end to mass incarceration. Today is a big day for people who have been left behind. People are coming together in an unprecedented movement to build this better future and a better world. And whether it's delivering thousands of groceries to our neighbors, introducing transformative legislation, or standing up to corrupt interests in Washington, it has been the honor of my life to fight for the Bronx and Queens in the halls of Congress. And we're just getting started. It's time to bring the movement to the voting booth. And that's why I'm asking for your vote on June 23rd.
So that's the final ad from AOC in her primary that will take place on Tuesday. We'll be talking to her in moments. But first, a couple of words from our sponsors. One is Sunset Lake CBD. I've been talking about them now for a couple of weeks. This is I got to be honest with you. I mean, I don't take sponsorships from products that we don't like, from industries and sectors that we don't like. And if I try the product and I don't like it, I also won't take it as an ad. But then there's like another category, which I really appreciate, which I consider sort of like movement allies. Just Coffee is one of those. And Sunset Lake CBD, these folks are fans of the show. Wanted to advertise, and I was psyched about it, and I'm loving their products. They are a farm outside of Burlington in Vermont, originally a dairy farm that was providing, and I think they still do, producing milk for Ben & Jerry's ice cream. In 2018, they decided to diversify. They are growing hemp. It's 100% pesticide free. They use organic fertilizers. They have a $15 minimum wage on the farm. Their employees own a majority of the company. And they have third-party tests. You can see it on their website in terms of the quality of what they're growing and the purity of it. They have all sorts of different CBD products. I'm deep into the tincture. It is now basically my go-to to get to bed, fall asleep at night, and it's been incredibly effective. I no longer use any of those prescription drugs that I used to fall asleep. I've had some success with the salve too. Not necessarily. It's supposed to be for achy muscles, which I feel like I'm always going to have. But it was helpful on my. Been using it a little bit for my hands on the. This is the time of year I get my eczema, but I don't think that's what it's meant for. And also, the CBD coffee, infused coffee, has been very big in my household. I'm now drinking that on Thursdays, and I've moved it to Sundays, and I moved it to Thursdays, and I find that I yell at the kids a little bit less when I've had that. That's helpful. I can't do it during the rest of the week because I don't want the kids to get feel like they have too much space. But also, they also have smokable and gummy bear versions of CBD, but they have smokable. And Matt is our resident expert on things that are smokable. Isn't that right, Matt? Matt, do we lose Matt? Well, Matt.
No, sorry. I was dealing with a Facebook issue. We're now live on Facebook. But yes, I am the combustibles expert, and my method, which is to mix that in with other stuff, apparently has been seen by others to be very effective for them too. So I'm a big fan of the CBD buds. There
you go. All right. So good. Oh, my daughter heard that comment. Yeah. All right. Well, so check it out. You go to sunsetlakecbd.com, use the promo code Left is Best. They chose it. I loved it. 20% off. Left is Best at sunsetlakecbd.com. They have all sorts of different smokable products. They have the gummies, and they have the tinctures, a couple of different ones. They have the salves. Check it out. You will be glad you did. 20% off with Left is Best. Also, as you know, I'm not necessarily I'm a slightly sartorially. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm challenged when it comes into dressing myself.
Sartorial.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And also, I have problems with pronunciation. But as you know, not only do I have troubles with tastes, but also it's difficult to get clothes, particularly during this time, because you're worried about sizes and can you buy something online? Is it really is a large going to fit me? It's tough to find something that fits perfectly. Well, Stitch Fix is a personal styling company that makes getting the clothes you love effortless. It's a totally different way to shop. To get started, you go to stitchfix.com/majority and you set up your profile. And what they do is they deliver you personalized looks in your colors, in your styles, and of course, in your budget. You pay a $20 styling fee for each fix, they call it, but it's credited towards anything that you keep. You can schedule it at any time. You don't need a subscription. Shipping, returns, exchanges, all that, all free, super easy. Stitch Fix does the hard work for you. It makes great style effortless. For me, I got a great pair of pants, Flag and Anthem. I had never heard of them before, but exactly like the style of pant that I like, and in the two color palettes that I will always wear, either blue, of course, or some type of like off green. In this case, the pants were off green, and I got those penguin chukas. Is that what they're called, Brendan? They're like they're sort of like desert boots, but a little bit nicer.
Chuckas, I believe.
Chuckas. And I returned the mock T-shirt because I don't do mock, not T-shirt, the mock shirt, the mock turtleneck. I don't do that. And it was all easy, super easy. You can get started today at stitchfix.com/majority. You get 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. That's stitchfix.com/majority for 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. Stitchfix.com/majority. So check that out. And as always, we will have all the links to our ads in the podcast description and in the YouTube description. All right. Do we have the Congresswoman? Yes. Okay, great. So joining us now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's the Congresswoman from the 14th District in New York. Congresswoman, welcome to the program.
Hey, how are you?
I'm hanging in there. How are you?
I'm well, day by day.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I just read a report from Business Insider that says a bunch of Wall Street executives, including the co-founder of Blackstone, the chief executive of Goldman Sachs, the billionaire founder of Tudor Investment Corporation, have been pouring money into your race. What did you do to them that they're so excited to invest in your opponent?
You know, it's so funny because I remember maybe last year there was a Democrat who will go unnamed, was telling me that they were at a fundraiser last year in New York City, and there were all of these kind of Wall Street execs and private equity types, and they were fundraising for Democrats, and they had a kind of Q&A session, and they said that like a bunch of them were just asking about me. And this member told me, you know, I realized then that they're so freaked out over just one member not being beholden or predictable to them out of 435. And they're like, she's just one vote. Why are you so stressed? And this is why, because over the last year, we exposed big pharma. We've exposed the military industrial complex in very material ways that have cost them millions, if not billions of dollars. So they're coming after me.
Yeah. And I mean, let's just, I was just mentioning the biggest opponent you have. I mean, there's a couple in the race, but the one who has raised the most money after you is Michelle Cabruza Carrera. She has moved into your district after living apparently in Trump Tower. She was a former Republican. She had a plan in 2010 to privatize Social Security and Medicare, and had written a book with Larry Kudlow, of all people, back in more Sprite days for Larry Kudlow. So she is now, I mean, what her argument is that you are, you're not spending enough time in the district. Give me a sense of the district and where someone coming from that place, coming from Trump Tower, has an understanding of what's going on in the Bronx and part of Queens.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really rich, her kind of coming through with this accusation, given the fact that she's never lived here. And B, you know, she just moved here 6 months ago. Maybe if she actually lived in our community, she would know that I'm home every weekend. And in fact, the only weekends that I wasn't really home in the district, which was about 4.4% of my entire time, only 4.4%, was when I was with Bernie on the campaign trail trying to get him elected. And so, which was just kind of, 4 or 5 weekends. And so, it's wild, but the thing that I think is really interesting is the narrative that she's running with, that I don't get along with the party enough, which is really, we have a Republican funded opponent who's running as a Democrat saying that I need to fall in line, which I think is just such a perfect encapsulation of US politics right now, which is that, there's more affinity and more of a relationship in terms of capital, in terms of big money, between kind of the more conservative elements of the Democratic Party and actual Republicans than we actually have affinity structurally with progressives who put working families ahead of corporate interests.
Yeah, and actually, I want to get to that. Before we do, though, I want to talk just a little bit about. I guess this dovetails a little bit what your closing ad was, which was recounting the 3 crises that we are going through now, and in particular your district, which is in many respects, sort of like the epicenter within the epicenter on some level of all 3 of these crises that you listed, and. But your response is that we need a systemic response, a systemic addressing of these issues, as opposed to short-term fixes. Give me a sense of how you walk that line between both what you need to provide locally, but also dealing systemically means that you've got to do that almost in Washington. Well,
it kind of mirrors, it's all part of the same thing. So, for example, if we start with COVID and the economic crisis with COVID, along with the health crisis, on the ground, we started with mutual aid networks. So my campaign, we fundraised about almost $1 million, about $850,000 direct to district, directly to mutual aid organizations, which is kind of it is a radical form of social organizing with roots in the Black Panthers and even earlier with food assistance programs. And so instead of, trying to bankroll palm cards and whatever, during COVID, we started going directly into mutual aid networks, which is a completely unique form of organizing that is really built for moments like these, that is built on principles of community care and this idea that we do not need to be controlled by corporations in order to sustain ourselves. And then that kind of trickles up towards our models of legislation that we push. Those are the same principles that Medicare for All is based on. Those are the same principles that a lot of our legislation is rooted upon as well. The fact that we don't need to be reliant on corporate power in order to lead prosperous, healthy, and happy lives. So whether it's COVID, whether it's how we're structuring and dealing with mass unemployment, which, by the way, when you have corporate power consolidated to such an extent, you can lay thousands of people off at once because it's one corporation deciding that. But then thirdly, we have the issue of racism in law enforcement. And I represent Rikers Island, which is home to some of the worst atrocities on U.S. soil when it comes to mass incarceration. And really, it's not about the four walls of Rikers. It's about the entire system of punitive and the carceral state that creates a Rikers. Because you can close this Rikers, but if you keep the system open, a Rikers will pop up somewhere else in the country.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about at least the response to at least two of those crises, I guess, in Washington. That's we've seen it in the context of the CARES Act, seen it in the context of the HEROES Act. You voted against CARES Act. You voted for the HEROES Act. First, let's talk about the CARES Act. Why'd you vote against that?
Well, the CARES Act it had some funding for hospitals, a couple billion for hospitals. It had no state and local, no relief for undocumented and tax-paying immigrants, and no relief for mixed status families. So those three in particular made the thing untenable, because if you're trying to contain a disease and you are not providing the economic means for the people who pack and deliver our food, the people who touch and deliver everything that comes to our homes, you don't give them the economic ability to stay home if they're feeling sick, then it's not a pandemic assistance bill. But the really important part of this as well is that while it had a couple bucks for hospitals and other forms of relief, it was not a relief bill with a corporate bailout tucked into it. It was a corporate bailout bill with relief tucked into it. It had $500 billion in unfettered money for Wall Street that was then being leveraged into $4 trillion, which is being completely unaccountable to, which has virtually no standards, and the oversight for it is a joke. This was a massive corporate giveaway and a huge restructuring of power in the United States. And we're really, while people are going to make a fuss about voting against it because it had a buck against a hospital and say, you voted for $5 against a hospital, we are really going to see in the years to come exactly how we were betrayed by that aspect of this legislation.
Well, I think we've yet to even get the congressional committee that's supposed to be overseeing where that money went. As far as I know, they haven't even met at this point.
And it's going out the door already.
And that gets to sort of the next point I wanted to make, which was that we heard a lot about structural change in the context of the campaign, at least the presidential campaign, that has subsided a little bit based upon who is now the presumptive nominee. But it really does feel like the Republicans use this opportunity to create structural change that we're going to see down the road as, everyone's driving under the yellow flag, except for the corporations who get the green flag. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about the HEROES Act, which was a message bill. Mm-hmm. You voted for this. Well, what was the message of the HEROES Act? I know it was much bigger, but there was a lot of it seems to me that for a bill that everybody knew was not going to go anywhere in the Senate, that message seems very, very mixed.
Yeah. Well, I do think that towards the end, while we were winding down on this bill, we started to hear from leadership this actually wasn't a messaging bill, that they actually are trying to negotiate this with McConnell, which we'll see. You know, from what we're seeing, McConnell is basically sitting on the HEROES Act in the Senate and waiting for everyone's expanded unemployment to expire to use as leverage so that everyone is desperate, and then he can, you know, push through something else that's terrible. But if it is intended as a messaging bill, I don't think it's a strong one, but I do think it tends to be the strategy of House Democrats, which is we're going to send a really strong message by packing in a bunch of things into a massive kind of omnibus style piece of legislation, when really, even in this moment, right, with police brutality, just repeal qualified immunity. I think that's a really strong message. Like, we just passed one bill that did one really powerful thing, and then maybe you pass another bill, and maybe you pass another bill. But the problem is really building those coalitions. So I think that's why these quote unquote messaging bills tend to be so watered down, because you don't actually have a majority of Democrats that are willing to do the strong message. So you have to cobble together kind of a huge package of legislation that doesn't necessarily meet the ends that we need right now.
But when I look at like some of the things that we're missing, like no automatic stabilizers, right? I mean, that just seems like poor governance. I get the fact that the number would be big, but what's the difference between 3 trillion and 4 trillion, right? Like nobody can conceive of either number. But Cobra, let's talk about this, because I mean, if this is a message bill, the message is we're going to provide for the American public the most expensive possible version of health insurance we can provide. Mm-hmm. We're not going to have automatic stabilizers because that's going to look like it's too expensive. Right. But we're going to subsidize the most expensive and efficient way that we can provide health insurance. How do you you voted for the bill. So, I mean, how do you justify that in that context?
Well, I do think that subsidizing Cobra is trash and it's horrible. For me, one of the tipping points for this and, you know, for what it's worth, like it is, I'm just going to say it's a sausage factory in multiple ways. And so you have to decide which terrible things that you're going to have to, in any given piece of legislation, you're going to have to tolerate for other things. And so for me personally, the thing that was a tipping point in the HEROES Act was Democrats did do something unprecedented, and it was really hard to get them to do this, which was include ITIN payers, including immigrants and undocumented immigrants, and including mixed status families. Democrats are notorious for being very weak on immigration policy. We're terrible at it. And this is the first time that we've really seen relief on this level extended to farm workers, extended to, you know, Uber drivers, the people who are delivering our food, domestic workers, and so on. Anyone who pays an ITIN, which is millions of undocumented people, will get a stimulus check. And in the desperation of this moment, I think that was really important. But I don't think that absolves the legislation. And we really should be applying pressure on Democrats who think Cobra is better than just expanding Medicare to the unemployed. Cobra is horrible. It's terrible. It's a corporate giveaway. And even in addition to Cobra, we also had two options, which was Pramila Jayapal's Paycheck Guarantee Act, or it was this like payroll tax deduction. And they went with like a payroll tax deduction that just a small class of employers would feel a year from now, which does not help our situation right now. Whereas Pramila's bill guarantees paychecks and also helps people transition from unemployment into employment without getting too hard of, without getting a financial hit with the expanded UI. And so, I think it's embarrassing, but at the end of the day, there is a corporate consolidation of power. There's a very strong corporate wing in the Democratic Party that we have to continue to organize against. And we are starting to expand that power.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about how that works. I mean, right now we're watching a race in a district next to yours in the 16th. Jamal Bowman is doing very well against Elliot Engel. I mean, we can only tell so much at this point. We're going to know more, obviously, at the end of day Tuesday. But it seems to me that is sort of been that's a little illustrative of what you're talking about here, right? Chuck Schumer just jumped in to endorse in that race. Like, why is Chuck Schumer that excited? Why is there this level of, you mentioned, why is Wall Street going after you? Your one vote, you're in, do they really expect to have a Wall Street crony representing the Bronx? Why is there this much? I mean, are we seeing like a fight against progressives for the sake of saying we're going to beat progressives, as opposed to like, we need Elliot Engel in there because we need that vote against the next bill, the next deal against Iran?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is kind of a disproportionate ire aimed at progressives. But I mean, maybe that's just me talking personally because I am one. But I also think that, 2 years ago when I won against Joe Crowley, it was kind of an emperor has no clothes type of moment. And I think that people got extremely concerned because he's not the only one that is in that type of position. Because the thing when it comes to corporate power, especially in the Democratic Party, is that there's more of us than there are of them. And by that, I mean, there are more progressive voters and people in the Democratic Party. Our policies are more popular than there are numerically of people who support corporate policies. And I said it back then, and I say it now, we've got people and they've got money. And in order for this kind of corporate hegemony to sustain itself, it requires Democrats in deep blue seats to support things like payday lenders, Wall Street brokers, private equity takeovers, etc. And that's been the big secret all along, right? Where if you can combine these deep blue seats with representatives that support Wall Street, that is the tipping factor. Or, it's not just Wall Street, it's our prison industrial complex, it's our military industrial complex, all of these fingers of the same hand. And so the key is these deep blue seats supporting these atrocious policies that are supported by payday lenders and all of these folks. And once you kind of get a crack in that, it gets very, very scary for a lot of these deep blue Democrats that are supported by those same interests. And so, I think that there's that, and also seniority in the House is a whole different ballgame. And so people want to protect those kind of the structural and procedural power where that derives. And so all of that kind of combines for the protection of policies and kind of this center of the universe that is these very well-funded, but kind of least representative interests.
So, I mean, is that part of the strategy? I mean, as you look, I mean, obviously, like, I think you're in a position that I think very few, frankly, freshman Congress people have ever been in, for that matter. You have an ability to fundraise that challenges people who have been there for decades. You have name recognition that is, in many ways unparalleled. So when you're thinking about how to build these coalitions, is going for those blue state Democrats in those deep blue seats who are, in your words, if I understand what you're saying, basically providing cover for the rest of the caucus to move to the right because they're ostensibly in the deepest blue seats. Is that part of the theory? Go after those and turn those first?
Well, I think that those seats tend to be very accessible for the progressive movement, right? It's accessible to the progressive movement. It's a lower lift in resources because it's already in our pocket, right? Whereas, yes, I believe that you can swing a seat with a progressive candidate. Absolutely. But it also costs $15 million to do so for one vote. Whereas you can run, and we can better use our small dollar resources, take that 10 million, scatter it around other seats. And then even if you don't end up, if that candidate doesn't end up pulling through at the end, you still get a dramatic shift in the incumbent's behavior as well. And that should not go ignored either. When I was running against Joe Crowley, he all of a sudden, I announced that I was going to run for Congress from behind a bar. And I was behind a bar working brunch at a coffee shop when I found out that he signed on to Medicare for All like a week or two later. And so then he started co-sponsoring all of these progressive policies just by the fact that I was running, even when I hadn't fundraised anything yet. And so I think it's more, you kind of get more bang for your buck in that sense, but it also takes very good progressive candidates, and I think that that's something that we need to be disciplined about as well. It's not just, it's not just about supporting any person who just rolls through and slaps a bunch of progressive policies on their websites. It's about, does this candidate have a history in the community? Do they have a context, a cultural, racial, socioeconomic context for the community? Have they served in any way? Doesn't mean that, have you worked yourself up the ladder of electoral politics, but Jamal Bowman is a school principal for 20 years. Like, he knows these families, he knows these kids, and he can effectively champion these policies in a way that, it is more than social media is an incredibly important role, but it also goes much deeper into kind of this candidate service. And, is there a real deal here? Is there a history here?
Right. All right. So lastly, last question for you. Once you've, when the dust settles and we get a House, after the 2018 election, let's assume for the sake of argument that the Democrats take the presidency, they take even the Senate. What do? You got 40% of the Democratic caucus is progressive. How do you work that inside game and make, there, at least there's a plurality there, right? What's the strategy to assert more progressive power within the caucus where there clearly seems to be some breaks on that?
Yeah, and we even have to be careful when we say 40% of the caucus is progressive as well, because there are moves that are made where the progressive caucus actually has no entry standards. Like, in order to join the Progressive Caucus, you don't have to sign on to you don't have to be a co-sponsor of Medicare for All. You don't have to be a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. There's no kind of, you don't have to not be financed by corporate PACs. Like, there's no real pledge. You just kind of pay the caucus dues and you're in. And so as a consequence, there are a lot of these deep blue Democrats who say they're part of the Progressive Caucus, but actually aren't pushing progressive policies behind closed doors. In fact, they work against them. And so for us, I think it's still a continued, there needs to be like real continued pressure on progressive movements and those folks that say that they are progressive, because 40% is a lot. And even if we're able to expand that majority in the House, which I believe is also possible, now we're talking about making real movement. And so I think it requires a lot of outside pressure, but inside, we're going to have to also work a lot on supporting the standard bearers and uplifting them in positions of power. Barbara Lee ran for chair of the Democratic caucus, and she was essentially kind of undercut by a more conservative wing of the party. And so we really need to have our inside game in terms of uplifting and making sure that we're surging some of those progressive standard bearers in the same way that we also have an outside game. Because when you have, Pramila Jayapal or Barbara Lee or any one of these progressive leaders, Ilhan, Ayanna Pressley, et cetera, pushing on whether it's decarceral policy, whether it's healthcare policy, whether it's, foreign policy and beyond, we have to make sure that we've got their back and that we are keeping attention to the inside fights as they are happening. Because so often the reason we lose them is because folks realize that votes happen after they happen, whereas corporate elements of the party are very well attuned to what the business that's on the floor. And really that 48 hours before a vote is the most important 48 hours in determining the outcome.
they've got the resources to sort of do a little more advanced planning, as it were.
That's right.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for coming on. Good luck on Tuesday. Really appreciate it. We're big fans here. My daughter is a huge fan, and I have now become much cooler in her eyes. So I
Well, tell her
appreciate
to say
that.
hello.
I will. All right. Thank you so much. Really
Thanks.
appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, we're going to take are we going to take a quick break or no? We got a minute, Brendan?
We have a minute here. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so there it is, ladies and gentlemen. You can find out more. I think if you Google Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you can find her website. I don't have the website here to get more information, but I don't know if there's any internal. I don't know. I'm not aware of any polling that's been going on. She has raised significantly more money than even the former CNBC host who wants to privatize Social Security. But I mean, I have to wonder if they are that like tone deaf that they would run someone like that against her, or if, you know, I don't know. They think that that's the ticket. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Professor Gerald Horne, the Moores Professorship of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. We'll be right back after this. Back, Sam Cedar on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Professor Gerald Horne. He is the professor of history and African American studies at University of Houston, and the author. His latest is coming out in July, The Dawning of the Apocalypse: The Roots of Slavery, White Supremacy, Settler Colonialism, and Capitalism in the Long 16th Century. Professor, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm looking forward to your new book. I remember when you were on last time, and like I say, I can't remember if it was in 2019 or 2018, but you had said that you were you basically had covered. In some ways, that book is the prequel to your the last book that we had you on for, which was, if I'm not mistaken. Gosh, I lost it, but it was like the apocalypse. We were full in the apocalypse, the roots of slavery, white supremacy, and that was in the 17th century. Thank you for joining us. Let's talk about Juneteenth. I think people know maybe a little bit of what Juneteenth is about. That it marks a day, June 19th in 1865, when essentially the Emancipation Proclamation was read in, I think it was Galveston, Texas. Tell us more about just the basic facts of this holiday.
Yes, and first of all, the 16th century book is now out, so you give me your address, I'll send you a copy. But in any case, with regard to Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger of the Union Army shows up in Galveston, Texas, off the coast of Southeast Texas, not far distant from Houston, Texas, from where I'm now speaking. And according to the traditional story, tells the enslaved that they're free. Recall that the Civil War had ended in April 1865, a couple of months earlier. But even though I support the move, and of course, there's just been a bill introduced in Congress to make Juneteenth a federal holiday, and corporations like Twitter have stolen a march on Congress by granting their employees Juneteenth as a day off, and I support that wholeheartedly. But the story is actually a bit more complicated than that traditional narrative. First of all, the Emancipation Proclamation coming into effect in January 1863 did not necessarily apply to areas where the United States did not exercise effective sovereignty. And that certainly included Texas, a bulwark of the so-called Confederate States of America that seceded from the United States in 1861 in order to perpetuate slavery forevermore. And then secondly, there was this lingering feeling among slaveholders in Texas that if the Confederacy collapsed, Texas, which after all had been an independent country between 1836 and 1845, and only joined the Union in 1845 because it was under so much pressure from British abolitionists and other global abolitionist forces. And so if the Confederacy collapsed, Texas had this idea that it would rejoin Mexico, from which it had seceded in 1836 because Mexico had moved to abolish slavery in the 1820s under a president of African and indigenous origin. Speaking of Vicente Guerrero, you may celebrate Cinco de Mayo here in the United States, which is a major holiday for people of Mexican origin, which marks a clash between Mexican forces and the French puppet forces under Maximilian. Maximilian, of course, had given a warm embrace to the Confederate States of America. And so the idea was for Texas to rejoin Mexico under Maximilian. But fortunately, what happened is that the Mexican people, in league with Black soldiers, I should add, including George Washington Williams, who was an early Black historian, collaborate to squash Maximilian, leading to his execution, of putting paid to this diabolical idea of extending the lease on life of slavery that these Texas enslavers held dear. However, I should say that unpaid labor for Africans did not necessarily end magically in June 1865. It continued for some time. How long is unclear. And certainly a kind of neo-slavery arises to take its place, speaking of the convict lease system, whereby Black men in particular were arrested on a flimsy pretext and then leased en masse to the same plantation owners who supposedly had freed them on June 19th, 1865.
So if I hear you, your I guess ambivalence is a function of people misunderstanding exactly what happened at that moment, and that Texas was really this isn't about Texas pride, and it really isn't in many respects about a status change of sorts for Black and African slaves at that time.
Well, I'm not ambivalent at all, as noted about Juneteenth. I salute those who are pushing that as a national holiday. I particularly salute West Coast Longshore, which as we speak are shutting down ports from Seattle to San Diego in solidarity with Juneteenth, in solidarity with the idea that it should be a national holiday, and in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. I'm only questioning the traditional interpretation, which I think makes rather simple and smoothed over a very complex and complicated history, and in some ways lets the enslavers off the hook, because independent Texas was a major slave trading force. Galveston was a major slave trading port.
Right.
That is to say that the Lone Star flag could be found off the coast of Africa, with the kidnapped then brought to Galveston, oftentimes transshipped to Cuba. One of the reasons you have so many Black people in Cuba is because of the manic energy of these Texas slave traders. They would also ship Africans to Brazil. That is to say, the slave vessels would sail straight from Texas, from Galveston to, say, Angola, load up the ship with kidnapped Africans and take them across the South Atlantic to Brazil. And so a lot of that history gets sort of smoothed over when you just talk about, General Granger shows up and tells the Negroes they're free, and then they begin to celebrate.
Right. Well, now, so let me ask you this in terms of like the development of the marking of Juneteenth, as opposed to the, let's say, I don't know, the day that the Emancipation Proclamation is signed. Like, I mean, how, why? And I hear you that, like, the end of the process, as it were, and I don't know that we're, really fully completed this process, but the end of the process, at least in the context of the official Emancipation Proclamation, regardless of what what's happening on the ground per se, would have been in 1865 as opposed to 1863. But what does it mean to celebrate that day as opposed to the day of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation?
Well, first of all, the train has left the station with regard to Juneteenth. I think it's too late to claw back that particular date, particularly since Congress is moving forward. Black organizations wholeheartedly endorse Juneteenth. It's marked, I believe, in 47 different states and in the District of Columbia. We expect Hawaii to join the 47 sooner rather than later. And so I think that the importance is having a day on which there is a solemn remembrance of the horrific nature of slavery, and then using that process to connect the horrors of the past with the carnage of the present, recently seen on the streets of Minneapolis, the streets of Atlanta, Staten Island, and too many other bloody sites, too numerous to mention. That's important. With regard to Emancipation Proclamation, you may know that many historians, particularly Black historians, have been revising their opinion, shall we say, of Emancipation Proclamation. This idea that it did not apply to areas over which the Lincoln government had jurisdiction, such as Maryland and other states that controlled slaves, but did not bolt into the Confederate States of America. So it did not apply to them, but it applied to states where they did not exercise meaningful sovereignty, such as Texas. That seems a bit slippery, too clever by half. And so I understand why people are reluctant to hang their hat on the Emancipation Proclamation.
And my understanding is that the first Juneteenth was actually celebrated the next year in 1966. Is that right? I mean, excuse me, 1866.
Well, sure. And as we speak in southeastern Texas, there are going to be many remembrances. I mean, it's a grassroots project. I mean, and I think this is how things should work. It's a project that came from the grassroots, that came from below, that is to say, from Black people themselves, and then it's adopted by others. It's adopted by Twitter, it's adopted by other corporations, it's adopted by states in the District of Columbia, now introduced into Congress. And to me, that's a model of how we get a day off that's paid.
Right. But I mean, is it, I mean, I guess, and I guess, a part of having, part of the reason why I wanted to have a historian such as yourself on is, in some way as that, this is the most prominent, I think Juneteenth has been, at least in my lifetime. And I think a lot of that is a function of what's going on in the streets right now. But we're the speed in which it's being subsumed by what you're talking about, the corporations and, 25% off on all furniture, this, Juneteenth. I mean, I don't know how far away we are from that. Seems to be, maybe it's just our, it's just the nature of our society today, but having it be interpreted properly and celebrated properly seems to be hugely important. And it's almost like, and it's also, it's shocking that that it hasn't really occurred to the society at large to celebrate this, particularly. I mean, I've come to understand through, frankly, from your work and others, in looking into Reconstruction, much of what happened, much of the America that we live in today is formed in those, in really those years from 65 to, I guess, 75. I mean, the Reconstruction has at least set up a template for our civil society today. It's sort of shocking that we don't have anything to sort of commemorate and to make people consistently aware of it.
Well, if the 45th president were on the line, I'm sure he would intervene and say, as he said in the Wall Street Journal today, that actually the popularity of Juneteenth has a lot to do with himself. He says that when he decided to have this rally, this is going to take place in Tulsa tomorrow on June 20th, he originally was June 19th, he said he brought a lot of attention to this idea and helped to thrust it into the spotlight. And so you may want to give him a shout out or give him a pat on the back as a result of, say, the rooster helping to bring the sun into the sky in the morning, for example, by crowing. But in any case, you raise a very serious question as to the fact that slavery oftentimes goes unremarked in the United States of America. I remember in 2007, when Britain was marking the end of Britain's role in the African slave trade, 1807, the 200th anniversary in 2007. Then Prime Minister Tony Blair spoke, the Queen spoke. It was a big deal. It went totally unremarked in the United States of America, even though, of course, the United States of America was a major slave trading nation. It was even the recipient of many of the enslaved brought on English and British vessels. And I think there's a certain level of discomfort with slavery in this country because it tends to disrupt the immaculate conception theory of the creation of the United States, that creation myth that sees the creation in 1776 as being flawless and perfect. Of course, Nicole Hannah-Jones of the New York Times won a Pulitzer Prize just recently for an essay in August 2019, marking what she said was the 400th anniversary of the arrival of enslaved Africans, where she suggested that slavery had something to do with 1776. And of course, all hell broke loose. The establishment historians have begun to attack her in scurrilous terms and actually haven't stopped to this very day, which I think is unfortunate because, as many leading historians have said, our obligation to history is to frequently rewrite it and frequently reinterpret it because different generations oftentimes have different historical needs. And I think that that's what's happening today as we speak. A younger generation is looking for an interpretation of the past that helps them understand the present. And I think a lot of the past interpretations, they help to bolster a kind of liberal narrative, which puts liberals in the forefront of the struggle, and I guess made them feel good about living in the United States, and it tended to downplay indigenous dispossession, and tended to basically indicate that there were more people involved in the abolitionist movement than there actually were. And so now people are looking for an explanation for Trumpism. I mean, how did we reach the brink of catastrophe? How did we reach this precipice? And this sort of overdetermining of liberalism as being the motive driving force of the creation of the United States doesn't fit with Trumpism, who, as of today, we cannot say this force will be defeated on the first Tuesday in November. So I think that reality is crying out for new interpretations. And I think also that the Black community is crying out because the Black community is trying to explain this carnage in the streets, trying to explain this pornography of violence captured on tape that's leading to lynchings in public with officers of the state nonchalantly executing this grisly task while staring into the camera as if they were taking a walk in the Sunday park.
Right. I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, just to, because I really do feel, I mean, that I am personally, in terms of like my understanding of history has changed dramatically over the past, 5 or 6 years, I would say, based around the question of race in this country. I think I've said in the past, I think it's Carol Anderson's White Rage, I think sort of just was one of the pieces that came together for me to see that there's a real continuum here. I mean, and I think that's what you're suggesting, is that, we need to reevaluate history to get a sense of exactly how we, our estimation as a society of what paths we took have been, do not jibe with where we have ended up on some level. And it suggests that maybe we didn't follow the map that we thought we followed. Do you think, with that said, do you think that there is a danger in looking at slavery as a binary? I mean, slavery is in and of itself is binary on some level, but the forces behind slavery, the societal context in which slavery is created, is not binary. In other words, that like you get the Emancipation Proclamation, then you get this it read in Texas. But if I remember correctly, the general who read it basically said, like, incidentally, not much is going to change. Like, you got to go work and you can't really get paid that much. And that those forces, just because we said slavery ends, those forces that constructed slavery continued on to construct other functions that in some way function in the same way that slavery did. Does that make sense?
Well, certainly convict lease system, which I've already made reference to, was a kind of neo-slavery. And I think there's always a danger when one seeks to reinterpret history, because the interpretation may not stand up. I mean, to give you an example, historians, whether they acknowledge it or not, they start off with a theory of the case. I mean, for example, I'm doing a book on Texas as we speak, which is why a lot of this material is fresh in my mind. And so part of my theory of the case was with regard to collaboration between the enslaved African population and the indigenous, particularly the Comanche. So when I'm going through documents, I'm taking notes on that. But then what kept popping up on my in the documents was the enslaved population collaborating with their masters to a degree against the indigenous population. Now, the way historians usually work, they stick with their theory of the case and they don't take notes on something that does not comport with their theory of the case. But I felt compelled, and I do feel compelled, to try to explain that what I consider to be a kind of anomaly. And it was an anomaly because the collaboration with the indigenous was much more prevalent. But the lack of collaboration, it seems to me, deserves an explanation. And I think that that's been part of the failing of the historical establishment, is that they have this theory of the case and they stick to it. And then I think that leads to misinterpretations. I mean, for example, Oregon in the 1850s, when it enters the Union, says no Negroes allowed, no slavery allowed. Now, the historians oftentimes say, oh, Oregon is anti-slavery. Well, yeah, but they also don't want any Negroes, period.
Right.
Free or slave. And it's the same with Georgia in 1733, when it becomes a settlement, a British settlement. It says no Negroes allowed, no slavery allowed. Now, the historians stick to the latter. Georgia comes into being as anti-slavery. So how do we explain this anomaly of it becoming a major slave state? Well, just refer to the fact that they said no Negroes allowed. So certainly there's a danger with interpreting and reinterpreting history, but I think those dangers can be avoided with certain kinds of clear methods.
Okay, so and I got to tell you, I'm super excited to check out the Dawning of the Apocalypse, your latest book, and we're going to have you on for that. But give me a sense of how do we celebrate, aside from with the hopes that next year, maybe in the years to come, folks will have the day off on Juneteenth. How do we celebrate? I mean, has there been any sort of concerted attempt? Was there in 1866? Was there were there means in which to specifically, I don't know, traditions or whatnot? I mean, in my own sort of sense of things, Passover as a holiday is to celebrate the emancipation of the Jews from Egypt, essentially. And we have very ritualistic things, but how, within the context of Juneteenth, are there other things that, and if you were in charge, are there some that you would want us to adopt?
Well, it's just like the King holiday, which I think has been revisioned as a day for volunteer service, for service to humanity, by working in soup kitchens, by registering people to vote, and the like. With regard to Juneteenth, I think that historically it's been a day of solemn remembrance. It's been a day of reflection on how this catastrophe was unwound, speaking of slavery. And I would like to see an extension of that tradition. Once again, I think that if we are to ever understand these eruptions from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and in fact globally, over the past 3 weeks, you really have to understand slavery. And once you begin to understand slavery, as Michelle Bachelet, the leader of the United Nations Human Rights Council, announced the other day when they had these hearings on, quote, systemic racism, unquote, in the United States of America, with the brother of George Floyd addressing the body in Geneva, Switzerland, Michelle Bachelet not only called, she's a former leader of Chile, as you know, the president, she not only called for a repairing of the torn fabric of Black American society and ultimately U.S. society by dedicated means of reparations, and she did not limit it to the United States. She also spoke about colonized Caribbean, colonized Africa, etc. And so I would like to see Juneteenth being a day for rededication to what Michelle Bachelet has already articulated. That is to say, helping us to understand this carnage in the streets and helping us to try to forestall a further eruption of carnage in the streets.
Gerald Horne, thank you so much for your time. We'll put a link to your newest book at majority.fm and look forward to having you on to discuss it.
Fantastic. And have your aides send me your mailing at your postal address and I'll send you a copy.
I will do. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Professor.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Brendan?
I don't know who he was talking about.
My piece.
Tell Sean.
Or Patrick, yeah.
All right, folks. Just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Listen, if you're listening in Kentucky, get ready to vote. Charles Booker, really, if you want to send a message to Chuck Schumer, or to any of the establishment of the Democratic Party, you can do so. You have a lot of opportunity in the next couple of weeks. If you're in Colorado, if you're in New York, if you're in Kentucky, Chuck Schumer has spent, has spent. I mean, I don't. He hasn't spent it personally, but a ton of resources on promoting Hickenlooper and Amy McGrath. And Hickenlooper has fallen apart. McGrath has fallen apart in these two states. I don't know if Romanoff can win in Colorado. I don't know if Booker can win in Kentucky. I don't know if Bowman can win in New York's 16th district. But make sure you go out and vote. You still have time to support those candidates. Very good chance, not a very good chance. There's a chance, a legitimate chance, the Democrats are going to take back the Senate. And the difference between Romanoff and Hickenlooper, I don't know if McGrath or Booker can win in Kentucky. My guess would be probably not, but who knows? Will be a big, big difference. Even one or two votes in the Senate that are not siding with, what Chuck Schumer wants to do is he wants to have members in his caucus, as I believe Nancy Pelosi does. They want to have members in their caucus who are to the right of them on one hand, so that they don't have to move things in too much of a progressive direction. And as AOC explained to us, they like having these deep state blue representatives who are corporatists because they work the other side of the spectrum. And so they narrow the Hickenloopers, the Kristen Sinemas, the Mansions, the Heidi Heitkamps when she was in. They narrow it on the right side. And then on the left side, they get these blue state Democrats who can project themselves to be progressives, and they narrow the options that are available. And one of the quotes that AOC had that I forgot to bring up was when she was at the Queensboro Bridge for the Bernie Sanders rally. She said something to the effect of like, I can't find it here, but it was something to the effect of like, Sanders made her aware in 2016 of just like what she expanded raising the expectations for what politics should mean, raising the expectations of what politics could deliver for people in terms of, raising the expectations of what is a right. People have a right to health care. They have a right to housing. They have a right to an ability to have a living wage. So this is a real opportunity. It's not dramatic, and it would have been more dramatic had we had a presidential candidate who reflected this. But maybe it just means that we're not quite there yet. There's not quite enough power amassed. And the way you amass this power is sometimes in spikes and sometimes it's in more incremental ways. But you have an opportunity to influence it over the next couple of weeks and do that. I don't know how we got there. I was giving a promo to become a member of the Majority Report. But also make sure you vote. Check out the AM Quickie. We got merch now too at shop.majorityreportradio.com, shop.majorityreportradio.com. We're coming up with, and if you have like ideas for what we should put into the merch shop, by all means, let us know.
We're working on some new stuff.
We're working on some new stuff, says my aide, Patrick.
Please stop.
And don't forget, tune into TMBS this week, the Michael Brooks Show. Some guy named Noam Chomsky was on.
How about them apples?
Was on the program. You can find that on YouTube and obviously patreon.com/the Michael Brooks Show. Also, Nomi's show, Nomiki Show on Patreon, patreon.com/the Nomiki Show, and youtube.com/the Nomiki Show. She's talking police reform and talking about candidates. Check that out this week. Jamie, what's happening on the Antifada?
I'm so glad you asked. So this week on the Antifada, we have not one, but two interviews that we have stitched into a single show, NPR style. The first is with our friend Alex Edward from the podcast Minion Death Cult. He is a Seattle resident, and he speaks with us about life in the Chaz or the Chop or Antifa Stan or whatever you want to call it right now. It tends to shift in name, but the autonomous zone in Capitol Hill. We talked a little bit about life in the auto zone and what that's like. We also speak with a listener named Matt Marciniak, who is part of Justice Frontline Aid, a mutual aid project in Minneapolis that's helping liberated goods find their way to the people who need them. And then Sean and I do a little bit of commentary. I think we did a good job. Check it out. Patreon.com/the Antifada.
Matt, what's happening on Literary Hangover?
I'll be hitting the high seas of the North Atlantic tonight in Assassin's Creed Rogue while listening to a few more chapters of The Pilot by James Fenimore Cooper.
How many different games are you playing simultaneously?
That's a big question. I mean, I like dozens. I would say I got a big hard drive here.
Now, can I ask you this question? Do you go through? Do they still have like you're going through levels, or is that sort of old school that you actually?
No, there are some levels. They'll call it like chat. Oh yeah, you can finish these games. Some you can't finish, like the sports ones. But yeah, I finished A Plague's Tale: Innocence while listening to Daniel Defoe's Plague Journal, for instance.
Because back in the day when I would game, I couldn't switch. I had to finish a game before I could move on to the next game.
Oh yeah, I got like 8 that I'm currently progressing through.
Yeah, I think that's just I'm like that with food too. I got to finish my peas and then my potatoes and then my Brussels sprouts or something like that. I can't mix it all together.
I cook it all out at a different time. So I'll cook one dish at one time, then I'll cook another dish and just kind of snack over the course of a few hours. I don't do all my cooking at the same time.
Well, that's weird. All right, folks. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
man, I see the end of that thing, and I think, God, that must have taken place like 30 years ago when I was that fresh-faced and bushy-tailed and eyed at the end of that clip. I feel like this coronavirus episode has aged me about 40 years. You feel like that, Jamie?
A little bit. I mean, I'm just tired all the time, but it might have more to do with the fact that I ran out of my ADHD medication and can't get more.
You can't get more?
Well, it was a process. I can get more now, but my insurance is sketchy.
Right.
I just had to go through well, I haven't even gone through it, but I ran out of contact lenses, and I don't know, I don't know when you can start setting up new, appointments with eye doctors to get your prescription updated. So they have this thing that's really involved where you can self-test yourself at home, but they have they need your webcam and audio so you have to stand 10 feet away from your screen. And I'm like, I'm not doing all this. I'm not giving you permission to look at me through my webcam to make sure I'm 10 feet away. Like, no, I'm just going to wear my glasses.
I can actually help you with that. If you give me your social security number, Matt, and also the routing number for your bank account, I will be able to maybe work something out.
Presumably you'll need my prescription for my contacts too, right?
Oh, right. And that too.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
Of course. All of that together. I want to take this clip here. This is clip number 13, Brendan, so you get this one set up. Huge ruling yesterday, not so much from a legal perspective, because the ruling by the Supreme Court was simply that the Trump administration is completely incompetent, that they don't think things through. They don't even attempt to make a rational argument, or they're incapable of making a rational argument for the moves that they make. And therefore, Trump's attempt to overturn the DACA executive order, I guess, which is basically just prosecutorial discretion, I think it was found to be capricious. And so from a legalistic perspective, it is these folks, 700,000 children, but also young people who were brought to this country as children and by parents who were not citizens. They don't know much about the countries they came from. Some instances, nothing at all. They are as American as any of us are, but for a piece of paper that says it. They have, at the very least, a reprieve, and presumably, I don't think the Trump administration can get it together in time, with the hopes that the election will change the administration. 700,000 people, and then hundreds of thousands more, maybe, even more than that, of family members and friends and whatnot. So there is a huge sigh of relief that is being breathed. Here is Chuck Todd, a very, relevant voice, at least in the context of the political media, assessing what this means to whom on his program the other day.
And Chuck, over to you.
By the way, on the DACA front, the happiest group of people are Senate Republicans collectively, because they did not want that on their docket on the Senate's agenda in an election year. We're going to have more on this breaking news on DACA.
Jamie, do you think the happiest group of people in the country because of the DACA ruling are really Senate Republicans?
I think they're pretty low on the list, actually. They're certainly not number one.
I would say they're probably not the happiest. They could be happy because they're not going to have to deal with this political hot potato, but the complete lack of sort of like awareness of the implications of this in real people's lives is pretty stunning.
Are you saying that there are no GOP senators who are DACA recipients?
I'm going to guess that there are none. And I would also guess that that Chuck Todd has not taken the opportunity that one has when one has a TV show, like an interview show, to ever talk to anybody associated with or who was a dreamer or anybody associated with a dreamer, just to get a sense of it. Just to keep yourself honest on some level, like just be aware that there's actually, like, this is not just a game. It's actually has real implications for real human beings' lives. I don't know.
Kind of on that note, I think it was the New York Times. They did, the paper of record, history's first draft. they did a report on the trans ruling and didn't have any sort of trans representation in the quotes. So,
well, that would involve like picking up a telephone. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me? Sam, this is Larry Kudlow.
Oh, Larry Kudlow. Oh, well, great to hear from you.
Don't think that I'm not hearing the things you were saying about me on your little pod show, whatever thing.
Well,
but you might think I'd be mad, but I'm calling with something of a olive tree.
Olive branch.
Okay, potato. You see, there comes a time in every man's life when the one person they need is a day drunk hype man, and that bell tolls for thee, Sam. I've heard you begging for pennies from the proletariat, and it's embarrassing. Okay, you know that
pennies,
other pod shows are. You know that these other pod shows are slinging prescription-free boner pills and hair growth shampoo, right, Sam?
Yeah.
You're getting left in the dust is what I'm trying to say, and that's where I come in, okay? You keep your conscience clean, and I will say literally anything.
Wait, say that again?
You keep your conscience clean or whatever,
okay.
And I will say literally anything.
Yeah, but you're going to say that now, or are you just saying in general? You're going to say literally anything?
MyPillow.com. Coupon code CEDAR for a free copy of What Are the Odds? From Crack Addict to CEO, the Mike Lindell story.
Oh my gosh!
And what a story indeed. Mike's a good guy.
Yeah,
good guy. He used to be a lot more fun. I'll tell you that. 1985, I got into a yacht with Mike and came to 6 months later in a bathhouse in Taiwan.
Okay, that's great. I don't know if we want to. I don't know.
Sometimes, you just need a guy who will tell you you're the best.
All right.
Who's better than you?
Well,
who's better than you?
Well, I don't know. Probably nobody. I just wanted to say, Larry, before I let you go, you were, I'm sure you remember, I would do your show back in the old CNBC days. And I thought you were very pleasant. Sure. I thought you were very pleasant to me. So I just want you to know, I appreciate it.
Whatever you say, Sal. Whatever you say.
All right. Well, thank you for the call.
You look like a delicious snack. You look great.
Great. Thank you.
And I want to smell your shirt.
All right. Well, maybe I'll mail it to you. How's that? I'll mail it to you. So, Larry Kudlow, everybody, thank you. Let's go back to the phones. 509 again. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Oh, did he? Oh, he hung up. I want to talk to you about DACA. All right. There it is, folks. Well, let's take one more quick call, and then we will move on. I want to talk to him about DACA.
To Larry Kudlow?
Yeah. Well, no, to the next caller. Calling from an 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
It's Josh from Chicago.
Josh from Chicago. How are you, Josh?
I'm good. How are you? I just ordered more of those CBD things. They're awesome. They really hit the spot.
Right. Aren't they great? Which one of the things did you get? The smokable?
I got the gummies, but I find that CBD is I have a mixed track record with them, and these are actually pretty effective.
Yeah. That's I feel the exact same way, and certainly
also my testimony.
That is we're all on the same page with this.
I like it too. Yeah. I actually ordered some from them after you did the ad, and they even threw in a little extra flower for free and wrote me a nice little note in the packaging.
Wow.
They like the pushback that I give you on MR, Sam.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Hopefully I get that in my next order. I just want to plug the DSA slate in New York that's running.
Okay.
For the state races, and also we have a candidate for Congress as well. But in District 25, we have for state senate, we have Jabari Brisport, who is running. He's the state senator is retiring. I think it's Montgomery, I want to say. She's stepping down, and there's two other candidates in the race. And he's running at the pro-charter school, anti-New York Health Care Act candidate. So people should vote for Jabari. And Assembly District 57, Farah Sufant Forrest is running against Walter Mosley, who is a huge bagman for the real estate industry and takes lots of money from the real estate people. She's an incredible candidate. If people have heard about her, I was pretty blown away by her when she came in for our endorsement, and I think AOC endorsed her as well. And then also Assembly District 51, Marcela Mitayon. She's running against Felix Ortiz, who also is a bagman for the real estate industry. The common theme, a lot of these Assembly District assemblymen are bagmen or bagwomen for the real estate industry. But that's actually a four-person race. Unfortunately, there is someone, Catherine Walsh, who's running in that race, and it's unfortunate, I say, because the district's actually only 15% white. Not sure she should be running. And then in Assembly District 36, which is in Queens, that's AOC's district. Zoran Mamdini is running, and Caban got 80% of the vote in that district. So it's a pretty good bet that will flip. And then, of course, also Somalis in New York 15th. I've made a lot of phone calls for this in the past 2 weeks. This has sort of been like my pet project. I've gotten a lot of positive responses, and I know there was
She's an amazing candidate
poll that was released, but I don't know. I think this is a very unpredictable race, and I don't think people should just be scared just because Ruben Diaz could win that to not support Somalis, because I think she's got a decent chance, especially given the fact that Bernie just endorsed and she's been out raising both Richie Torres and Ruben Diaz. So, I mean, I think it's worth supporting Somalis and not being scared. But if you're in New York, people should vote for these candidates because, I mean, this is like the best way also to get back at Cuomo and make his life help.
Josh from Chicago, thanks for the update. Appreciate it. Where can people go? Just go to where can people go to see the entire DSA slate for their state? Or first, give me New York, and then if they want to go see it.
So just go to DSA's official website, which is DSAUSA.org, and you can see the entire endorsements. Actually, they just endorsed Jabal Moment as well, but for DSA specifically, go, I believe, DSA.nyc. You can also go to put into Google Democratic Socialist DSA NYC for the many, and that will take you to a link where it lists all of our endorsements, and that also includes AOC and Julia Salazar. And you can, if you want to donate to them all, you can donate to all of them, and they'll split the donations proportionally.
All right. Appreciate the call, Josh.
Jabari actually was just in a little Twitter spat with Lori Cumbo, who he ran against for city council the last time around. Apparently, she wasn't too pleased that he and a bunch of other protesters showed up outside her house to try to make their demands known in terms of defunding the cops and not building any new jails.
Yeah, what was that? You sent me. Who was not happy?
Well, nobody was happy whose houses they showed up to. They protested outside multiple city council members' houses. This one guy, the tweet that I sent you, was he was very mad, and he wanted AOC to step in because, you know, she's the manager of DSA. He wanted her to step in and tell all the protesters to calm down and go home and not protest outside of city council members' houses.
Well, I called the manager on Elliot Engel on Twitter, Chuck Schumer. I said, you've endorsed this guy. Do you really stand by the ads that this guy is putting out there? It was sort of disgusting.
It's okay when we do it.
Yeah, that's the way I roll. Mm-hmm. Hey, you know, there's a lot of times that Jamie, I know you can relate to this, where you're in the middle of a meeting or you know, a round table, and you get a little bored by it, and you decide like, oh, I'm going to check my messages, see what's on Twitter. But of course, if you're the president of the United States and you're holding this because you're in the middle of a pandemic and a commensurate economic crisis, may be a bit of a problem. Here's Donald Trump messaging to the Small Business Roundtable. I don't care.
Challenges. So increased labor would be probably the biggest effect on our bottom line. Additional employees have been added to answer the phones, and runners are needed to take orders out to the guests waiting in their car. By mid-May, sales were picking up, and we did have our best Mother's Day ever, seeing double-digit growth over last year's weekly sales.
Pretend like I'm listening.
When restaurants were closed for inside dining, I was forced to furlough some very dedicated and loyal employees for the first time ever.
What's going on with some white supremacists on Twitter? Got to catch up on that. Gonna retweet that. Let's see. More pictures of my daughter. What do you think he's looking at?
God only knows.
Let's play that again. I like how he's sort of playing it off and trying to make it seem like he's actually paying attention. I like it.
Challenges. So increased labor would be probably the biggest effect on our bottom line.
Okay.
Additional employees have been added to answer the phones, and runners are needed to take orders out to the guests waiting in their car. By mid-May, sales were picking up, and we did have our best Mother's Day ever, seeing double-digit growth over last year's weekly sales.
Oh, good.
When restaurants were closed for inside dining, I was forced to furlough some very dedicated and loyal employees for the first time ever.
About furloughing employees. I don't care about that. I'm just more interested.
Anyway, I'm at the farthest I've ever got in Temple Run. So if you could just wrap this.
Yeah, this is really great.
Also, you turned your flashlight on, so.
Oh, I did? Oh.
Yep.
The way they treated Joe Exotic was very unfair.
Who did that zoom in? They didn't do that at the White House, did they?
No, that was the edit by the.
Who did that video?
The recount.
The recount. Good for them.
Yeah,
that was pretty funny. Folks, I also know, I'm sure we all can relate to this, when you just simply can't get your dad's approval. It's very, very difficult. We've all gone to great lengths, I'm sure, to get dad's approval for things. Tell them they're the greatest president they've ever lived. Please, daddy, love me as much as you love your daughter. But alas, here is Donald Trump Jr. on their triggered Father's Day special. What better way to spend your time with your dad and your family talking about owning the libs?
It sort of feels like this election really is, it's the last hurrah of the swamp of the establishment. How do you combat that? How do you get people to understand that message? Because when I look at your accomplishments, they're incredible. You've delivered for America for the first time in modern political history, done the things you said you were going to do. At the same time, what people I don't think give you credit for is that you did that under unprecedented circumstances, under unprecedented resistance. You had nonsense impeachments, you had 3 years of Russia hoaxes, you had everything working against you, and you were still able to do it. Do you think that this election sets a different tone that would actually maybe get, I don't know, say the Democrats to actually work with you on things?
So I think if we win, the answer is yes, but I think regardless, we're going to have a tremendously successful country.
There you go. What do you think is going on in senior Trump's mind? I know what's going on in Junior's mind. Like, I want the biggest piece of the inheritance or whatever it is. Daddy, please love me. But what do you think is going on in Donald Trump's mind?
He doesn't. I'm of two minds about it because he doesn't really respond well to groveling. Like, he is way more into people who kind of like cuck him a little bit.
Yeah.
At least in the realm of like world leaders and stuff. But then again, he is susceptible to flattery. So I don't know. Maybe it's a start.
I think it's the former. I think he's sitting there going like, my son is so weak. He's so weak. He's an idiot. So stupid.
He's enjoying the high chair he's in.
Barely do this right. He was supposed to say that I've done better than Lincoln, and he couldn't even get that right.
Try again, Don Jr.
And here he is. And now if you go further into the triggered thing, apparently all of that was just to get his approval for his facial hair.
Between myself, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul, who have all grown sort of quarantine beards, who's his best and why?
Well, I don't like it on you, as I've told you. Yeah. And I think that's fine if you want to do it. I'm a libertarian in that way. You can do whatever you want. But I don't like it on you. I think that Rand and Ted look better without it. Both friends of mine. They're both doing a fantastic job, and they're both defending me all over the place. Huh? Good-looking guys. I think they both look better.
Such a serious answer.
Yes, exactly.
But I also think that they should do what they want to do, and that's what they'll do. And in some cases, I think it's good, but in your cases, get rid of it.
He got jocular there for a moment. It is such a strange, like you really going to go deep into that conversation? Like, I'm going to analyze it. I mean, they could listen, honestly, and I'm not just saying this. They can do whatever they want with their facial hair. I'm not just saying it. I actually believe it. I just want everyone to know that. You can't, but everybody else can. I want to just say that so that there's no mistaking. I'm not going to execute either one of them for wearing a beard that I don't like. It's gross, though. So gross.
Oh, he's so mean. Like, I almost kind of feel for Don Jr. in that moment.
Let me just reiterate multiple times, I don't like your beard. That's basically what my daughter does with my mustache.
Like, what is this even on? Like, how is this a real news thing on TV?
Well,
it's part of their campaign.
They produce it. It's like it's a campaign. It's a triggered special. You can trigger the libs. Look how triggered we are.
Yeah. Look how triggered Don Jr. is.
Yeah, exactly. I think, like, I wonder, what's the thing is now? It's like, what does Don Jr. do? Does he shave? Because if he shaves, he's messaging to his dad, I'm weak. I can't stand up to you. If he doesn't shave, he has to live with this notion that his dad is disgusted every time he looks at him. It's a little rough.
I'm sure it's keeping him up at night.
Yeah, if you thought the answer on mic was going to be different than the one I've been giving you off mic, you're sorely mistaken.
Yes, I still don't like you. I like your daughter better. I mean, your sister better. Fiegel. I work at Blackstone. Should stock up on AOC swag. Indeed. Jonathan Armstead, Sam, I have concerns on how Juneteenth would become commodified if it became a national holiday. Every year during Martin Luther King Day weekend, I see ads for white sales, even though King saw racism and materialism as two of the greatest evils in America. I'm already grimacing of hearing about Juneteenth sales on cell phone plans so you can get news ASAP. I laugh to keep from crying. I mean, yeah, I brought that up. I mean, I think that, like, I think I think it's hard. There's a real deficit in education on these things. And, with Martin Luther King Day, at least you can, like, although it's far more difficult than it should be, access his speeches and learn. They just give you something and I'm just thinking, I'm very, child centric about this, right? Because it's like, what do I do on Martin Luther King's Day? I make my kids listen to some speeches and read something about him. And I guess, if there were like a more popular access to Reconstruction, I think that would be very helpful. I mean, I just increasingly am just convinced that if people understood, if broadly speaking, we had some real education about Reconstruction, this would be a much better country in some way. And about the missed opportunity.
The ads that I've seen MLK photoshopped into are like pretty ridiculous.
Oy.
He would want you to get 10% off on a new car.
Why not?
That's what he would have wanted.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from an 818.
Hey, Sam, can you hear me?
Yes. Who's this?
This is Dave from Jamaica, Sam.
Dave from Jamaica. Wow, you sound like you're next door, Dave.
Yeah, secret tech, but hi to your aides or servants.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's nice.
You didn't hear?
I know I did hear. I said I appreciate that. It's always nice for them to get some recognition. Makes them feel good.
Yes. I would recommend the Antifada. They had a lovely episode last time. So it was let me try to remember. It was the Let's Go to the Chop. So I'd recommend people listen to that.
Thank you.
Also, speaking about the watering down of these things, since it's like a public holiday, right? Like whether it be MLK Day, Labor Day, June 19th, whatever it is, I think that has to be more with the educational system, with what's taught in schools, because lives people live now. When you get a public holiday, to be honest, most of us are just thinking about vegging out on the day, than necessarily going too deep into the meaning of the day. Or is that a wrong reading of it?
No, I agree. Like I actually like, I mean, if I was in charge of everything, I would say go to school on holidays, and the whole day is going to be dedicated to the holiday, to understanding why we celebrate this day, frankly. But and then just give the kids off a random Tuesday.
Right. But that's typically what I notice with any public holiday, regardless of which country you're in. Since most people's work schedules are so mind-numbingly overpowering. When you get the public holiday, you're not really thinking about Eugene Debs on Labor Day or anything like that. You're just, I need to veg out.
Right? Yeah, no, it's true. So, I agree.
So maybe it's expecting a little bit too much for people to kind of like, let's crack open a book or something like that. It's just.
Well, I mean, on some level,
it's a tricky thing to.
Yeah,
go ahead,
on some level,
sorry,
like,
go ahead, Tom.
One of the things we try and do, like on Labor Day in particular, and on Martin Luther King's Day, is to sort of just dedicate the podcast to, I think we play it. I don't know if we play a Debs speech, but we try and find different types of speeches like that. I mean, I agree with you. But it also, there's no doubt, it also causes some measure of reflection, more so than not. You know what I mean? I mean, that's why I brought up to Horne that is one of the things I think is really successful, if you will, about Passover is a holiday for Jews, because it's all basically just, it is basically just like, it is so ritualistic in some way, but all the rituals are very explicit as to what they're referencing. So like the whole holiday is literally just explaining what the holiday is about. That's the way that you celebrate it. And it's effective. I mean, it's effective in like raising issues that I think are important to society. And you also get a little license to sort of like push it in that in certain directions. That's what I like about it.
Oh, well,
I think what disturbed me most is like I remember when I was younger and I was more into the music scene and I'd watch BET more regularly, and then when Martin Luther King Day would roll around, you'd actually hear a speech unedited and it goes, but as you said, no, it's Ford trucks and all of that shit.
I agree with you.
It's kind of I'm not sure how you solve that.
Well, if we get rid of wage labor and people aren't working all the time 24/7, they'll have more time to really learn and reflect on holidays like Juneteenth.
That's right. They won't have to. They won't have to spend their time kicking back on those days because it'll be actually unique insofar as it's actually that holiday, a day of where you commemorate.
Mm-hmm.
Dave,
and we'll get rid of
call.
consumerism. You can't Photoshop Martin Luther King into ads if you got no ads. Boom.
Chainsaw Billy test. I would suggest masks that actually function as protective masks rather than as tiny billboards. The masks are awful quality. I don't think so. Frankly, I don't know what you mean by that, but the masks that we're selling are not N95 masks. They're masks that are basically to prevent you from spreading it. There's a I actually have it on my phone now, where there's a graphic where it shows. Let's see if I can do this here. I don't know if we can see that. Can you see that? That graphic
more or
shows
less.
like
I get the idea.
if you're with someone who's carrying COVID-19 and you're in the proper context, which I think is increasingly, they're finding is, indoors in close proximity. If you're wearing a mask, the contagion probability goes down 30%. If they're wearing a mask and you're not, it goes down 95%. If you're wearing a mask and they're wearing a mask, it goes down 98.5%.
The mask does as it says, too.
Huh?
Our mask does as it says.
Exactly.
It protects the people around you, and if they're wearing a mask, it protects you.
Exactly. But appreciate the weighing in on that. Foreign agent, English Pro Soccer Premier League reopened this week. The season would have normally ended early to mid-May, but was suspended on March 10th with 9 rounds left to play. No spectators are allowed, and all players and staff have been pre-screened for COVID and other several rounds of testing and quarantines. To create some atmosphere, the NBC broadcast here in the U.S. played fake fan noise provided by the FIFA video game. EA Sports is a major sponsor. Also, all the players' jersey had Black Lives Matter printed on the back where their names usually go, and everyone, players, coaches, referees, took a knee before kickoff. Can you imagine the MLB, NBA, or NFL doing any of this? I don't know. I mean, I spoke to Dave Zirin for Ring of Fire. Incidentally, we're playing a Romanoff interview on Ring of Fire this week. And he said he expects a lot more white players to do it in the sports code, but we'll see. Notice the MR code is a Manhattan code only. Very suspicious for a Brooklyn-based show. 646 is not. That's not Manhattan only.
That's New Manhattan, I think.
I mean, there are cell phones with that area code.
Yeah, I mean, this is not even. It's not even our phone. It's a Twilio number. Also, Jamie, I take Concerta, and I'm from Canada. It costs me around $300 US a year through the province's pharmacare. How does that price compare for you?
Okay. If I want to pick up my Vyvanse this month, and like my insurance makes me go through a whole rigmarole every time, if I don't figure it out with my insurance, it's going to cost me $600.
Cat loving Kami. What up, crew? I got to plug the Funk the Police fundraiser hosted by Mass Action from 5 to 8 in Dorchester this evening. There'll be lots of water and PPE for attendees. Organizers need some help with covering expenses for porta potties and the like. Love and solidarity. Funk the Police, Mass Action, Dorchester. MIDI Doctors. How do we celebrate Juneteenth? We burn down the real Wall Street, obviously. Shofar for the YouTube chat and hit the like button. All right,
Hell yeah.
I'll do that. As you know, Juneteenth is a function in many respects of the Emancipation Proclamation. Emancipation Proclamation signed in January of 1863. Sorry. And Juneteenth celebrates that proclamation essentially being read, Galveston, Texas, 2 years later, a little more than 2 years later. How the Emancipation Proclamation came about is a far more complicated story than just Abraham Lincoln writing it. Now, by saying that, maybe what I'm really saying is I'm belying the deep, deep distrust and anger I have towards Abraham Lincoln. How would you know? Well, because Dinesh D'Souza tells you that.
A lot of the thuggery, the gangsterism, the knocking down of monuments, the unlawful occupations that we see around us, all of this is reflecting the radicalization of academia over the past couple of decades. One could almost say that academia is the theory and Antifa is the practice. And initially, the attacks were on the Confederate monuments, and people kind of looked the other.
1 second. I want to make this clear what he's saying. All of academia functions to provide the theoretical framework for anti-fascism. I mean, I suppose, man, some of it, that's probably,
I wish that were true.
That would be nice. But all of academia, that's the function of academia. That's, I don't even, it's, wow, that's pretty broad, but.
Talk to a Marxist professor about their experience in academia.
That's just a cover. I think we know. Go ahead.
The attacks were on the Confederate monuments, and people kind of looked the other way. But it's really interesting to see how quickly they've metastasized into attacks on Washington, attacks on Jefferson, and I think most tellingly, attacks on Abraham Lincoln. Because right away we have a puzzle. Here's America's greatest president, the guy who freed the slaves. And why pull down his monument? Why go after him? I think the answer is that the left secretly hates Lincoln because Lincoln was actually very effective in unmasking the Democratic Party. Lincoln said very significantly about slavery, it's you work and I eat. So for Lincoln, slavery was a kind of economic confiscation. And Lincoln saw that as the core principle of the Democratic Party. Well, fast forward 150 years, and what's the core principle of the left and of the Democrats today? Economic confiscation. You work, I eat. So I think the hatred of Lincoln is that Lincoln had the number of the left. He had the number of the Democrats. And he represented in some ways not only the Republican spirit, but the American spirit.
Why did they have to show a picture of Christopher Columbus being pulled down when they were talking about pulling down the Lincoln Memorial, I guess? Is the left attacking Abraham Lincoln?
I have no evidence.
I mean, I think there might have been protests at the monument because that's, a place you go when you're protesting.
Well, I mean, that's where MLK had
Freedom
a big
March,
rally there, right? I mean, but I don't think it was because they were mad at Lincoln.
I mean, I certainly have my critiques. I think some of the stuff Lincoln wanted to do after the Civil War did not go far enough. But, as the president of Antifa, I have not assigned any monument wrecking because of those critiques.
Well, that's what I wanted to hear. I wanted to confirm that. I like the idea that it was simply an economic confiscation is what the issue was with slavery, just an economic confiscation. Of course, you can go ahead because we all know about all the fair wages and the living wage that was then provided. Like the only harm was that you're confiscating their economic power. That would suggest a broader capitalist critique that seemed to just end with, it being completely binary. You can confiscate the power of the economic value of that labor, as long as you don't take all of it. As long as you take, you can take 75% of it, you can underpay people for their labor, you can exploit them. That's all well and good, according to, or we're satisfied with that. as opposed, but when you take it all, that's when the real problem is.
I mean, if anything's getting confiscated right now, it is the surplus value that workers produce for their bosses.
Well, that's my point. He doesn't seem to have an issue. He presumes that that Lincoln was against the idea of economic confiscation, and therefore Democrats who practice that now in the form of taxation really hate the fact that he unmasked that idea, that Democrats at the time were in favor of economic confiscation. They still are, but it's flipped because before it was economic confiscation from labor.
Mm-hmm.
And now presumably the Democrats don't have a problem with that. They just want to make sure they're just into economic confiscation from capitalists.
Yeah, well, making capitalists pay taxes is just like slavery. You heard the man.
There you go. Boom.
Yeah, and Jeff Bezos is doing all this work while his employees are eating. It's just really unfair.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
What's the worst of the two clips that we have of Tucker Carlson today?
That's a good question. The longer one.
Yeah, I would say that. Here is Tucker Carlson on his program last night. It was his monologue. What should be the biggest concern of Americans today? Well, of course, people who think that Black lives should be valued in the same way that white lives are in our society.
But Democrats know better than that. They don't lie to themselves. They understand there is a revolution in progress. The death of George Floyd may have sparked widespread outrage, sincere outrage, and they may share that outrage. But they also know that what is happening now has very little to do with George Floyd or people like him. Like all revolutions, the point is to destroy the current system and replace it with something new. But replace it with what? That's the question the rest of us should be asking right now. We should know what's coming. We know what we have now. Our current system has been in place for hundreds of years. It's based on a very simple idea. All people are created by God with equal moral value, period. Every one of them. For that reason, and that reason alone, all Americans are treated equally under the laws of the United States. In this country, we judge you for what you do, not how you were born. That idea has been the defining principle of America since the 18th century. It's the main reason we are the fairest society in the world. It's the reason people move here. To the extent America has failed to live up to that principle of equality, we are ashamed of it. We should be. Equality is the most important thing we have. We should defend it. We should practice it. Now, for the first time in our history, we're witnessing a broad and powerful attack on the principle of equality. Daily, we are told that all people are not, in fact, created equal. Some were born with moral stain, others were not. Some Americans are guilty, some are innocent. Nothing can change this because it was all determined at birth. All we can do is respond accordingly. People in favored groups must be held to one standard. Those in disfavored groups, the morally tainted ones, must be held to another standard. The country retains one set of laws, mostly for the sake of formality, but we must apply those laws in very different ways, according to the DNA and the background of the accused.
All right, let me translate what he's saying here is that he is afraid that he is basically arguing that white people are now oppressed in our society, that these people want to create, and these people, I don't know who these people are. I don't know if we're included in his definition of these people. Maybe we are collaborators with the Black folk who want to do this.
Oh, we are. Jews are an important part of this conspiracy theory, actually.
Well, of course, yes. I mean, we're pulling the strings. I was talking just broadly speaking as a white person, but as a Jew, yes, I have a special place in this because I've got my whole control center right behind. All I got to do actually is I press this panel in right there, just push it in. The whole thing spins around, and I'm in a control center.
InfoSec, Sam.
I'm not worried about it. People don't know where I am. People don't know. He says, in this country, we judge you. Who do you think, like, and Matt, Brendan, join in here. Like, who's the we and what is the judge? Like, what are they what is he I mean, this is like
he wants to make it
really slow this down and digest what he is saying, because it's really deeply distubing where he's going with this whole thing. We, like, in this country, we judge you. Like, who's the we and what is the judgment? Because the fact is that where you are born, what zip code determines. There's so much. If you give me 100 people born in a specific zip code, and I find out the median income in that zip code, there is so much that I will be able to tell about what you're going to be doing 20 or 30 years from now, or 40 years from now, that either I'm a mind reader, or there are certain things that are literally cast in stone. And even in, even like a river of stone, the water runs down. The vast majority of it goes in one direction. There's always going to be exceptions. A little water trickles off that way. A little water trickles off that way. But our society, the fact is that it's not a question of moral taint for the vast majority of people. It's simply a question of, like, how much has the history of this country led to you being born, luckily, in this area by these parents. The systems have been built that your future is already in some ways predetermined.
If there's a stain, like, he wants to make it a moral stain when really if there's a stain, it's a material stain.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of Howard Schultz when he's like, we should start using things like people of means or people of wealth, because he's actually getting to the point where it's offensive. It's as offensive being an anti-black to be anti-rich person. I think, honestly, Tucker kind of feels and wants to plant.
Oh, yeah. He's saying that just by talking about white privilege and, probably class privilege as well, although he paints himself as a populist, you are impugning the morality of all white people and prejudging them for that, when that is, in fact, not what's going on. It's just a material fact.
His argument is that black people and their accomplices are saying that white people are morally repugnant because they are white. And he is basically just setting up. I mean, he's just basically saying there's a race war that's brewing. You need to be aware of it. You are considered to be hopelessly irredeemable. Our society is considered to be hopelessly irredeemable. So what they're going to do is attempt to eliminate you. That's the message. I want to say subtext, but it's almost the text, frankly, of what he is saying to his millions of viewers, the vast majority of whom are white. And they're not morally tainted by their virtue of being white. But certainly what they're being fed is tainting them in some way. And it probably is going to taint their behavior in some fashion.
It's crazy because that's really the exact opposite of what's going on in this movement. Like, nobody has told me not to participate because I'm white, and, well, Jews, slightly different, I guess, under this rubric. But it's about believing that the world can be better, and that, white people should participate in making the world better along with people of all races, because it's a movement for racial justice, and it's a working class movement. And, when black people live well, everyone will live well.
This is very much, I think, consistent with the idea that he's arguing that it is in part one side of an argument that it is a zero-sum game. And if, I hate to bring this back, but if black people get rights and have value in our society, then it's necessarily going to come out of the social capital of white people. And I think on some level, there's some measure of truth to that.
And that's why this is so insidious, I feel like.
Yes.
On a cultural level.
Well, I mean, a lot of people in this movement are also socialists, and we want to change it from a zero-sum game to something that is more liberatory for everyone. Like, I was talking about this on the Antifada the other day with Sean. Like, it used to be that it was a pretty good deal offered to white workers in the, the post-war era, saying you don't get to control your own life, really. You don't get to own the means of production, but you have a decent standard of living, you have a job, and you're definitely above a lot of people who are lower than you on the totem pole if you're a white man, right? And now relative privilege still exists, but the absolute goodies that gets you when you cash it in at the racism factory or whatever is not so great anymore, right? Like, if it's a choice between being like living a decent life as a white worker and everyone below you is immiserated, that's one thing. Now it's more like a choice between being like white people are kind of immiserated and black people are like very immiserated. Like, I can see why fewer and fewer people would think that that's a good deal.
Yeah, but I think that's not. I mean, I think Tucker is sort of studiously avoiding that. Insofar as that, like, to the extent that there is any type of material analysis that goes in it, it's just that black people are getting all the money through the the Obama cell phone slush fund or whatever it is. And I think what he's basically saying, when he's talking about moral tainting, he's not talking about material benefit because he can't, because he knows that the people he's talking to and that he himself, they're when they look at this, what's going on, it's not, their concern is not necessarily material. They resent the fact that they perceive it as, that these people are getting something for nothing. But what they're talking about is social cachet. I can't say certain things. I am considered a racist because I have certain opinions, that people can call me a racist, that I can feel like I am somehow on the outside. It used to be I was centered. I was centered in everything. I was the one who would get the yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And now I'm not. And I mean, look at, like, how do you describe the effectiveness of, you can't wear masks? I mean, we have a situation now in Arizona and in Texas where mayors of blue cities, for the lack of a better term, have literally had to beg for the opportunity to have mandatory mask wearing in the middle of a pandemic when it's spiking in their environments. Same thing in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, the governor of Oklahoma has said that if your city calls for mandatory mask wearing in public, we will deny you federal funds. We will deny you federal funds. Now, like, in what possible, like, calculation is mask wearing the ability to make this cultural on their behalf? Like, how does this is the thing, I think, like, where, this gets back to our old timey zero-sum game argument. Like, to me, that is a cultural signifier that just becomes a way of basically saying, like, I am against the everything that is in any way communitarian, everything that is, that to me is an example of people who say, like, I am losing my privilege. I am being told what to do in a society for the sake of other people. And that concept in their heads is, I think it is consistent with a mode of thinking that has been transferred from, like, we got the federal government coming into our states and telling us what to do. And we know what the underlying basis of that is. I mean, in part economic, and it was developed certainly, to protect the economic, fortunes of slave owners. But I don't know that. I mean, even if I can see that, I don't know that that hasn't taken a life of its own now, where you see it's so easily transferable to just wearing masks during a pandemic.
Yeah, well, this is what the right does. They make everything into a culture war, and they mystify the material facts that I was just laying down, so that, maybe white people will decide that they would rather, they think it's in their best interest to side with rich white people like Tucker Carlson. Like, it's layers and layers of mystification over like the actual material facts of what's going on in society and how people can best advance their interests.
Yeah, anytime they can highlight and emphasize the government controlling your life as opposed to your boss, they'll do that.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we should not try to find common cause with wing populists. Like, sorry, it's basically just fascism. It's never going to.
Jamie's freezing up a little bit. Is that me or is that her?
Yeah, I think the right-wing populists got to Jamie.
Right-wing populists who shut down her internet. Here is a Taco Bell employee. Here's an employee, Denzel Skinner. And this comes from the Elijah Daniel Twitter feed. Here's Skinner. He's been working at Taco Bell for 8 years. Probably was a fairly early. I don't know if he ever took time off. Right? He's probably a necessary worker or something like that. And here he is working at his Taco Bell, which I'm sure has been his, well, I mean, he's been working there for 8 years, so it's basically been the way he's been paying his bills. And watch this video.
You just fired me because I got a Black Lives Matter on. You just told me I had to go home because I got a
You weren't going to take it off.
I'm not. Because I'm standing up for what was right. I'm not taking it off. Tammy said we could wear whatever mask.
No, she did not. She said it had to be plain. You can't bring politics into the building.
Bro, I'm not bringing politics in. This is what I'm standing for. Like, how is this considered politics?
How is it not, Denzel?
I'm not taking it off.
Okay, well then there's nothing I can do for you. I'm just doing my job.
I'm doing mine too. And I'm standing up for my peoples too.
You don't get it.
You don't either.
No, I do get it.
No, you don't. Because if you did, this wouldn't be a problem.
It's not that it's a problem with me, Denzel. It's a company thing.
Man, I ain't trying to hear that.
You let somebody wear something that said something about white people on it?
Bro, if that's what they stand for, yes.
I'm not against for what you stand for either, but I have to do what the company says.
The idea that this is, well, I mean, is it political? I think it probably is political on some level. It's not partisan politics. And to the extent there's a political divide, it is between people who don't think that Black lives either. I don't think they would say. Well, I don't think. I don't agree with the proposition that Black lives don't matter. But then they must believe that we live in a society where Black lives are considered as valuable as white lives. And there is just, you have to be completely oblivious to our history and our present to believe that. I mean, it's just like, I don't know, pick a statistic. Pick a statistic. Look at what happens with, I mean, just look at the difference in the protests. You have to be willfully ignorant. And if it is a company policy, like, did they get a complaint?
Yeah, I mean, I worked at McDonald's. Those things are all sort of owned, as far as I know, by like local business owners. So this is how the sort of management, right? How they chose to sort of kick it up the corporate line, or you could choose to have solidarity with the workers you're surrounded by. And she chose to say, you know what, it's a company thing.
Now, if I was a labor lawyer and I was going to go back to the National Labor Relations Board and say that their reversal of the McDonald's franchisee issue was illegitimate, I would bring that tape in. As you can see, corporate does have control over these employees.
Yep.
To the point where, as they're micromanaging, to the point what logo can be on their mask. Really nuts. Been working there for 8 years. We're going to fire this guy. Don't want to get involved in politics. You know what else is absolutely the AMC, the movie chain, the movie theater chain. When they were asked, when they announced that they were going to reopen, and this is really stunning. Pull up this. It's in Variety, I think. Brendan, I think you can find it. AMC opening up. Where is it? Yeah, you pull it up. I want to talk about this. This is really sort of stunning. Yeah, roll down into this. So AMC, it's the world's largest theater chain, is going to open up 600 venues. It's been closed for 4 months. It's going to operate in about 450 of those locations on July 15th. Expects to be fully operational by the time Disney's Mulan debuts on July 24th. I'm not going to take my kids into that. No effing way. So here it is. AMC CEO President Adam Aron, we didn't want to rush to reopen. There were some jurisdictions in some states, such as Georgia and Texas, that allowed people to reopen theaters in midway. We opted to remain closed so we could give the country time to get a better handle on coronavirus. Now, that assessment, would you guys say that's a political assessment? Or is that just like, you know what? We have some liability. We think that these things aren't that safe. Turns out Texas is I don't know what their rate of infection is increased to, but significantly. Would you guys say that's a political decision?
Yes.
That's politics in there. They don't want to close. Well, I think according to Ron, you would imagine, because he goes on to say, here it comes. AMC, no, scroll back up just a little bit. AMC will not mandate that all guests wear masks, although employees will be required to do so, nor will AMC perform temperature checks on customers, though it will monitor. The situation will be different in states that requires people to wear masks. But Iran said AMC was wary of wading into public health issue that has become politicized. We don't want to be drawn into a political controversy. The political controversy over wearing masks. We thought it might be counterproductive if we force mask wearing on those people who believe strongly that it's not necessary. Well, what? Then why did you close? You forced it on people when you wouldn't open, when Texas and Georgia said you could. I mean, this is just absurd. We're living in an era where a business is afraid of imposing basic hygiene. Well, why? What about the politics of like, why do I got to wear a shirt? Why can't I go in there barefoot? I mean, come on. What about all this like political messaging that we're getting with employees must wash their hands? What is this, Russia? Are we Chi-Coms now? Employees got to wash their hands. This is absurd. And I mean, I think it's unfair because I think Nomi's going to win the pool on how many people are wearing masks tomorrow in Tulsa with 5%. She just parachuted in after I said 10%, thought that I was going to be the low end on this. But I think she's going to win. If I had known that she wasn't, that she was going to parachute in and give a number, I would have gone 4%. Because we have a president who's out there basically saying, like, you know, the pressure is not to wear masks.
There's breaking news, though, Sam, now. AMC is now requiring people wear masks.
Boom.
This came out 20 minutes ago.
Well, good for them. AMC Theaters listens to its guests and scientific advisors and immediately reverses course. Yes, well, good job. Because I got news for you. I ain't going into a theater. I ain't going anywhere indoors in any circumstance without a mask.
Yeah. And maybe all the people that were advising doing the whole avoid politics thing, maybe you should demote those people and not use their services anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. Fire whoever came up with that idea. Like, we don't want to promote politics. First of all, you're an idiot. They should be fired. I'm not going in any location unless it's like, I can imagine a friend's house who I know how they have been functioning in this environment. Going into their house without a mask. That's conceivable.
Still uncomfortable going into people's houses without masks.
Like, I mean, I haven't done it, and it's the weather's okay and people are outside. So,
yeah, I've been hanging with my friends outside. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, excellent.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I don't know when it cut out. I think I was just getting on a roll about Tucker's right-wing populism, but I'm sure it'll come up again. The reason I thought that maybe about 25% of people would be wearing masks at the rally is just a couple different reasons. Anecdotally, of the Republicans that I know, which isn't very many of them, some of them have more advanced brain worms than others, right? Some of them totally bought into the whole Trump, this is a conspiracy, it's not real. Some of them like half buy into it, but they also know what the truth is in the back of their minds. And that beeping sound.
Yeah, that's the backing up. You don't get to back off your 25%.
No,
now.
I didn't. I'm not. I'm explaining it to you. And part of why I think they will wear them at a rate of about 25%, as I said, is because people don't understand that the masks are to protect others and not really yourself. And people are selfish, right? They're going to get a little bit scared. They're going to get a little bit freaked out. And they're going to be like, oh, just to be on the safe side. Then again, there's going to be a lot of social pressure, a lot of peer pressure once they get inside.
And the people going to this are going to be the craziest of the crazy.
But I'm also... I have one stipulation that I want to clarify, that we should clarify before we get into this.
A little late.
Before the bet goes down. And that's, what if Trump does a performative gesture where he says, everyone put on your masks, and now we're all going to take them off. That means everyone in there, more than 25%, have worn their masks.
No. It's not how many have worn their masks.
Oh,
no.
Do they have to wear them for the whole time now? Are we moving the goalposts?
It sounds like it.
I think 25% are going to show up
so
with
intensely
masks.
that he's going to say, "Put them on now, take them off."
Yeah,
you can't see that.
That's implausible.
That's
I don't
possible.
Come on.
That's possible.
I think,
but I do think that Jamie may be onto something. That their own ignorance, that their masks are actually to protect the other people, that their ignorance to that, and their belief that their masks will protect them, will cause them, I would bet, to wear it to the front door of the event. But as soon as they start to go in and everybody starts giving them dirty looks for wearing a mask, like literally, I bet you there's going to be people in there going like, anybody wearing a mask in here is probably like some type of Antifa, mole. That's what I think.
There will certainly be more people wearing masks at the beginning than at the end.
I want to show up there in a diving suit.
One thing that's interesting is that I read this morning is that the vendors will be open at the arena. So there will be staff workers there who work for the arena who aren't technically employees of the city. They're subcontracted through some entertainment service, but they are not being made to sign the NDA waivers or the disclosure waivers that Trump is setting up. So that can make for interesting.
The disclosure, you mean, or the liability waiver?
Liability, excuse me.
There's also, I know that the arena ended up asking the Trump campaign for what they're doing to protect people. And they've been, as a requirement, they haven't given it to them in 2 days. I imagine they'll get it in there, but it won't be anything significant. But all right, let's check this out here for a second, because Do you guys have anybody that any of your friends that have that were formerly leftists and are now like they've left the left?
Not that I can think of. If anything, people have been moving in the opposite direction, and I'm very happy about it.
Brendan, Matt?
No, zero.
And friends being radicalized, which is
so they're going the opposite direction
Yeah.
because, all right, well, that's good news because that means none of us here are in protection mode. At least that's according to Dr. Dave Rubin.
There's nothing to fear but fear itself. It's something like that we create these monsters. And then when you actually go ahead and do whatever you're supposed to do, you might step in the pool and be like, damn, I thought the water was going to be freezing, but it turns out it's 92.
It's
and
fresh, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
and
nice.
that's not to say it's going to be perfect, because trust me, it won't be. You will lose friends. I mean, we've all been through versions of this. People that you love will suddenly say the worst things about you. You'll watch. I'm seeing some of this now. I'm getting a lot of support from my sort of right-leaning friends. So, Shapiro and Peterson and Glenn Beck and Dennis Prager, that crew. A lot of my lefty guys who have been with me all along the road have completely abandoned me because they don't want to just deal with any of the backlash. And I also think this is a whole other topic, but I think that goes to a little bit of the lefty mind, which is in constant protection mode. That's like sort of like a whole separate thing, but...
So is he talking about like the Weinsteins? Like the Weinstein guys?
Or Sam Harris, maybe?
He's been deserted by is that who he's talking about?
Those are the only three I can name.
Well, he's talking about lefties who have left him, right?
Well, that's I think that's what he's talking about. I think.
I mean, his former friends from the Young Turks, certainly.
I don't think that.
They're in total protection mode.
They're in total protection mode.
It couldn't possibly be because they just don't like you and they think you suck. Like, it has to be some fear of like political cancellation, right?
Right. I mean, Eric Weinstein's really probably concerned about his lefty bona fides.
I wonder.
Peter Thiel.
Yeah, exactly. I think he just took your job, Dave. Like, he's the one that's a plausible moderate. You're on the Blaze.
Right. Right. He's on the Blaze, and I think part of it is also they realize like he's just not that bright.
Oh yeah.
He just cashed in.
Yeah.
That's what protection mode is. When you
they're
they're going to protect themselves from the I guess the guy that's
ideas.
Just not that bright.
It's distinct from recovery mode, and I'm not sure if you can get from recovery mode to protection mode or how exactly you transition between the different states of brain as per Dr. Dave Rubin.
What was that show that he was on?
I believe it's on the sound sheet. It's
the School of Greatness. Do you have to wear like the same thing as the host when you go on that show?
Yes, that's part of the set requirements.
It's weird.
It's a union thing, I think.
That's what we should do with the folks here. You come on the show, mustache only.
I got plenty.
All right. Lastly, let's just what is the right-leaning guys like Ben Shapiro, right-leaning? He's right-leaning. What is their response to the growing leftist movement in this country? Well, they are, how patriotic they are. Well, one could imagine what they think is the best remedy for the growing leftist movement in this country.
Maybe it's good for America to have a Cold War. The last Cold War kept the left from having its ultimate victory, right? Because they couldn't go to the ultimate extreme without actually being the enemy. Like, you're able to define why communism is bad, why the ultimate excesses of leftism are not to be desired. I mean, it could be that we find that, America needs an enemy, and it needs its enemy to be leftists. That's my optimism.
I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Possibility of truth. Yeah.
I mean, I do think there's a lot of truth to that America does need an external threat in order to have any sort of internal unity. I think that is certainly a real possibility. I will say that because of the policies taken toward China over...
I just want to like think of that moment as Ben Shapiro's thinking there. I wonder if he for a moment says like, hey, wait a second. This whole demonization of Muslims that I engaged in for years. Maybe that's what that's
off target.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
could you imagine he just stops mid-sentence and he's like, "Oh my God, I just realized what my whole career has been built on."
I think he made that realization a while ago.
And then he forgot it.
The rest of the clip is just him talking about China, basically. We don't have to.
Oh, we're hoping that we get a new Cold War with China?
He's saying it's going to be tough because we're entrenched with them economically. And they're an authoritarian state, not a true communist state.
You don't say. I mean, it's funny because a lot of the advances that we saw in the U.S. during the Cold War period were the result of having to compete with the USSR. And that's why America provided a welfare state and some measure of civil rights. Right? Because they were like, you don't got to go communist. You can have a better life here, working class. And like, it's the opposite of what he's saying.
I found maybe we've finally come together. All right. One final phone call. And then a couple of IMs calling from a 773 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. How's it going? Can you hear me?
Oh, wait a second. We're going to take one more call after this, too, because I think Ronald Reagan called back. Yeah, 773. Who's this?
Yeah, this is Anthony, the Chicago bureaucrat. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for calling, Anthony. What's on your mind?
So I got a bit of an older story to share with you all, but it's really, really relevant, I think, in terms of how our city is going to get actual structural reform around policing and accountability going forward.
Okay.
So back in about March, a coal plant was set to be demolished on the southwest side of the city. And this was approved by City Hall. And if you may recall, aldermen used to be ultimately in charge of all of the activities in their ward, right? But when Lori Lightfoot took over, that was moved more centrally, right? So ultimately, it was City Hall's call to approve this work going forward. Anyway, they demolished this in the first week of April, right? Sent a huge cloud of dust and debris into the surrounding neighborhood. And this is a neighborhood that, you know, already has high instances of asthma, breathing problems, et cetera. It's an industrial corridor in the city, right? So obviously, first week of April, we were just about shut down for COVID. COVID cases were ramping up. Not a good idea to send a big dust cloud into an area that already has high incidences of breathing problems, right?
Yep.
And getting into the point here, right? So the fallout from this was the local aldermen were basically just pointing their fingers back and forth at City Hall for taking away their aldermanic prerogative, right? So they no longer had the ability to say whether or not this project was going to go through or not, right? So they're just pointing the fingers and placing the blame at Lori Lightfoot, right? And ultimately, there's been a little bit of pressure put on City Hall, the aldermen from environmental groups, but what this is really getting at here is that there's really going to be a struggle in our city in order to get real democratic accountability for anything, right? Because our leaders are just going to continue to point fingers at each other,
right,
back and forth all day long, right? Unfortunately, we don't have the best turnout in the city of Chicago, right? That's how guys like Burke can get reelected outright and not even get forced into a runoff, even though he was facing an FBI investigation, right? So it's good to see that we've had continued pressure in protests, you know, for the past 2-3 weeks with the recent events, right? So these are happening all over the city, throughout the neighborhoods, organically, peaceful, organized, et cetera, but there's no real political will in City Hall or even amongst most of the aldermen, really, to put forth reforms that come along with accountability, right? So the mayor reformed how aldermen can make decisions in their own ward, but it was centralized and it didn't come along with any means to have real accountability tied to their decision-making. And quite frankly, they do that because they know there isn't going to be a huge amount of pressure put on them when a re-election comes. The only time we really get that pressure, quite honestly, is when we're negotiating union contracts, quite notably CTU
Teachers,
contracts, et cetera. That's the only time that you really see that pressure mounting. So I just want to say to my folks here in Chicago, right, we got to keep the pressure up. We got to insert ourselves into the electoral process, run for office, We got a lot of aldermen that are sitting on their asses, not doing a whole lot, right? And quite frankly, they don't have to because the turnout is so low. So I love my city, love all the folks here, but we got to keep up the pressure, right? Because that's the only way that we're going to get true democratic reform here in the city. So appreciate for taking my call, Sam.
Thanks for the call. Appreciate it. All right, one more phone call. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this?
Hey, Sam. It's Ronald Reagan.
Oh, Ronald Reagan. Good to hear from you.
How's it going?
Fine. Tell us about DACA, man.
Oh, yeah. Really good news yesterday. I think everybody was pretty surprised. I know there were a lot of conversations happening about, like, hey, when this goes the other way, you know, how are we going to fold this into, you know, what's going on in the streets with Black Lives Matter? And, you know, a lot of organizers were having really long conversations about that. And then it went the other way, and it took the wind out of the sails of those conversations, but kind of in a good way. At the same time, like, those are important conversations because the administration is pretty much signaling that, you know, their plan is to do it the right way, I guess, to properly rescind it. So we'll see what happens. They're not going to have time to do it before the election.
Right.
But they can start the process of unwinding it again. But it's been interesting because that's been the theory of the case the whole time. I saw a lot of people saying yesterday that, oh, you know, Justice Roberts gave them a roadmap for how to undo it. And it's like, no, the litigants did that. I mean, that was the whole argument all along, is that this is how, under the APA, you're supposed to undo something like this, and you didn't do it. So at any point over the last 3 years or 2.5 years, the administration could have fixed it. They could have just done what they were being told they were supposed to have done, and they didn't. And I think the administration has kind of liked this position of, like, having done something but not really. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But Chuck Todd nailed it. I mean, nobody is happier right now than Senate Republicans, I'll tell you that.
That's right. Well, I'm glad to hear that as an immigration attorney. You must have heard, you must have spent a lot of time getting champagne bottles popping with some of those Republican lawmakers.
Right. I mean, I can't even imagine what they must be feeling, honestly. But
hey, you don't know Matt Gaetz's life.
Oh, sorry.
Just saying, he's not a senator; he's a rep. But you don't know Matt Gaetz's life. You don't know his experience. All right.
Cory Gardner was in tears.
Yeah. Oh man, the Matt Gaetz thing. That's have you talked about that? You haven't talked about that.
I haven't talked about that because, to be honest with you, I have no idea what to make of it. And
very weird.
Such a horrible individual that I'm more than happy to leave, you know, that aspect of his personal life out of it. I mean, right.
Let me just
go ahead.
Yeah, I'll get you off of that. I'll tell one quick story of one of my, I don't have favorites, of course, amongst my clients, but
of course,
I met this kid in Portland. I had barely started practicing, and he'd gone to immigration court. He got put into removal proceedings because of a shoplifting thing. He's a teenager at the time. So he ends up going to immigration court by himself. He's unrepresented, and the judge tells him, you have to take voluntary departure. You have no options. And so he does what the judge tells him. And so he's sitting there with a departure date. And that's when I was contacted. And so we tried to get the case reopened. We filed a motion to reopen because the judge was giving bad legal advice. But then in the interim, while all this was going on, DACA happened. And he's now a union roofer. He's got a really good job. You know, just not to pit good ones against bad ones or whatever. All immigrants deserve, you know, dignity and basic rights. But he is just one of my favorite people. And the difference between what might have been and what is really, really dramatic. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. And we should also not lose sight of just how limited of a benefit it is, and that any congressperson who says now that we have DACA, we're hamstrung and we can't move forward on more permanent solutions. I mean, that's just a made up thing, right?
My understanding is that what Trump wanted, at least is the speculation I've seen, is that what Trump wanted was to shut down DACA. Let's say, he gets the right to shut it down, and he says, we're shutting it down in 6 months. I mean, which is basically what the order was at the time. I mean, and then it obviously got delayed. As a way of entering into negotiations on comprehensive immigration reform, or immigration reform of some, and then say, like, here, I'm giving you back DACA. And now we're going to, have no other immigrants in the country, or something to that effect. And so I think when you hear people say that about DACA, what they're saying is this means that immigration rights are going to have there's less leverage to diminish immigration rights going forward. And that's a problem.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And that's what before all of this got tied up in the courts, the administration had said, we'd love to pass the DREAM Act, along with slashing legal immigration by 50% and billions of dollars for the wall. Like, we're totally willing to negotiate.
Right.
And that's where those negotiations fell apart. But so you're absolutely right about that. And they were gearing up again for this to go the other way, and to come out with the sort of the Kushner plan or whatever. So anyhow, really good news, and people should take some time to feel good. I honestly wasn't sure what I was feeling yesterday. It was like I felt like maybe I was having a stroke or something, because it's just been such a dismal year. But it was good. So.
Well, I really do have appreciation for someone who experiences great news by feeling like it's a stroke. And also, I also want to just, congratulate you and your cadre of Republican senators, who I know are really feeling a great sense of relief and happiness today. So, Ronald Reagan, thank you for the call. There he goes. He is our resident legal representative of Republican senators across the country. All right, some IMs, and then we're going to get out of here, wrap up quite a week. It's been fun watching you transform into a gay biker these last few months. Your mutton chops are excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that. Does Matt know he's the diversity hire on the show? Thank you. There you go. Jet Junkie voted for Bernie and Booker on Monday. Majority report stamps. Stamps. Well, that's something to think about.
Yeah.
Like
Talk to your friends.
Like you stamp them like on your paper or something like that.
Talk to your friends at stamps.com.
But I don't know if they mean like postage stamps, or they mean like one of those things.
Like an ink stamp?
Ink, yeah.
To be honest, Sam, I found AOC's answer on the HEROES Act vote was better than I expected. Thanks for pushing her on it. Yeah, I thought she was very, sort of open on that. That, she basically made the calculation that putting a flag in the ground about immigrants was the most relevant for her. I mean, people can make that assessment. They can judge it on that. But I thought she was pretty straightforward about that answer. At Jets, Bridgeport BLM with DSA has been occupying the police department since last Saturday with a clear list of demands. City Council to talk/negotiate with movement leaders this afternoon. Oh, that's exciting. I didn't hear that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, five more. Jay Tingle. Also, maybe talk to Ray Gunn about the bizarre Garth adoption story. And by Garth, my phone means gets. I don't even want to talk about that. That's just a weird thing. De Blasio made Juneteenth a city school holiday starting next year. Oh, great. Mac J, new member, despite MB's mail-in Thursdays, tank tops for the swag shop. Can I get a shofar for the Genos, please? The Ginos. Jews and names only. Love the show. Oh, left is best. Right is white. All right, go ahead. I'll look at it. Pete Zapper, Papa Trump has such disdain for his fail son, Don Jr. Major corrections. Oh my God, the show The Great has a scene where the king orders the execution of a guy for violations of his no beard edict. Eddie from Ohio. Hey, Sam, today's my 31st birthday. Can I get a shofar? Also, I tried the tincture from Sunset Lake last night. Can't recommend it enough. Love the show. Thanks for everything you guys do. Well, sure. I'm handing them out like candy today. 2 more. Bravo-matic, how long till Cruz shaves his beard? A week. And the final I am of the day. Hey, Sam, just wanted to shout out Stephanie Kelton's new book, The Deficit Myth. Always loved her appearances, but I have much fuller understanding of MMT from this book now. Super accessible read, too. I am getting it in the mail. We're going to interview her for a vacation week that I think we're going to take very soon, actually, because I'm having a breakdown. So we'll do that soon. All right, folks. See you on Monday. Jamie, Brendan, Matt, good week. Thanks, guys. Stay safe. See you over on the other side of the weekend.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in.